EnCrypted Classic Horror with Jasper L'Estrange. Tales of horror, mystery, and suspense. I am setting this down in writing to make known the true circumstances concerning the death of Reginald Geach, and to state plainly my opinion that the man was haunted. My professional opinion, I ought to have said, for I was Geach's psychiatrist, and in the matter of mere weeks of our acquaintance I experienced things that rocked what I now know to be the shaky foundations upon which my own philosophies and beliefs were constructed. I am aware, of course, that there are those who still consider psychiatry to be little more than pseudoscience, and many of its proponents to be mere quacks and charlatans. I am also aware of those who believe the probing of the human mind to be reckless meddling. It is to my lasting regret that my recounting of the following events will do very little to disabuse the skeptics of their position. The only rebuttal I can offer is that at the time my story begins, I was of sound mind and body, and considered an esteemed practitioner in the field, although I had, it is true, courted controversy with my experiments in hypnosis as a therapeutic technique. It was my interest in such that brought Geach to see me. That was how I first met him, those 2 months ago. This spare, shambling little grey man of undiscernible age, sitting in my waiting room. There were another 5 minutes before our appointment, but as I slipped out of my consulting room to hand some paperwork to Gladys, my receptionist, I glimpsed him. When I say he looked a bundle of nerves, you will forgive, I hope, the hackneyed expression, for in this instance it described the man perfectly. His clothing was not obviously cheap, but it was shabby. His hair was somewhat lank and dishevelled, and he was palpably on edge, his body stiff, his eyes darting, rodent-like, here and there. He was nervous, and he made you feel nervous, just by observing him. Seeing me watching, Gladys said, "This is Mr. Geach. He's here for his 2 o'clock appointment." "Very good," I said, consulting my watch. "Mr. Geach, please step into my office. Gladys, some tea if you'd be so kind. Tea, Mr. Geach, or coffee?" "Thank you. Coffee would be began Geach, rising, but he stopped short, glancing at his shoulder. "I'd better not," he grunted, suddenly cowed. I opened my door and ushered him through, but he walked with ungainly uncertainty, persistently checking behind him as if he expected someone to be there. When in my office, his eyes were everywhere, and when I bade him sit down, he hesitated briefly, as if there was someone else from whom he needed permission. "I understand you wish to see me about these nervous tendencies you've acquired," I said, sitting across the desk from him. "Yes," he replied, flinching as he spoke, the small grey eyes once again searching his right shoulder. "I am quite desperate, Dr. Latimer. It has become very debilitating." "Please," I urged, "tell me about it." The little man began, falteringly, to explain the circumstances which had brought him to my clinic. "It began about 2 months ago," he said. "I can't be sure exactly when, for it was such a small thing to start off with. I would feel a touch, a light brush on my shoulder, almost as if someone was tapping me from behind, and when I looked around there was no one there. As you can imagine, the first dozen or so times it happened, I didn't think much of it, but the more it went on and the more often it happened, I started to worry. Well, one can't be too careful with one's health, I thought. It could be a symptom of something, I thought. So naturally I went to see the doctor, and he was as baffled about it as I was. A trapped nerve, he thought. Probably nothing too sinister, he said. But there were some other things it could be. Serious things, and it needed looking into, so I was sent for tests and the like. But nothing. These feelings, though, didn't stop. It continued throughout, and please don't think I'm being melodramatic. I used to be quite a happy-go-lucky sort of fellow. Anyone will tell you, but I began to dread it. It felt like there was someone there, all the time, following me, an invisible presence clinging to me, like a limpet to a rock. But worse, it was as if they were actually inside me. As if to add a physical exclamation point, he twitched involuntarily again. His eyes switched back to me as I, with a raising of the eyebrows and a slight gesture of hand, impelled him to continue. Well, I made the mistake of saying this to the doctors. Well, they were probably thinking it anyway, but the possible diagnosis shifted from the body to the mind. Mental case is what they were thinking. I could tell. And we all know where that can lead. So I said, I think I'm all better now. Whatever you've been doing seems to have fixed it. He was looking at me expectantly, leaning forward, perched on the very edge of the chair. I sat back in mine, my two crossed index fingers, like knitting needles, resting on my chin. But these sensations persist, hence you coming to see me, I said. I read your article about hypnosis, and how it can be used to unlock, how did you put it, repressed memories in the brain. He was talking excitedly, his tongue flitting out to lick dry, chapped lips. I need you to find out what's inside my head, Doctor. I need you to sort out the mess of my mind, and, if possible, to put it back together again. I'm a shadow of my former self since all this started, and I want my old life back so badly. I studied him, and as I scrutinized, it was possible, just, to discern the man Geach spoke of, the handsome, self-assured, devil-may-care young man, beneath the cowed, craven creature sitting across from me. I will be blunt, Mr. Geach, I began. Nervous habits such as yours can be brought on by tiredness or mental stress. As I am sure you are aware, they can also be symptomatic of a variety of brain disorders, some of which are hereditary. This additional sensation you report of being followed, of being conscious of a presence, could be indicative of a condition known as paranoid schizophrenia. Geach interjected, slamming a hand on the desk with some force. Once again, I could not help but notice the lack of fluidity in his movement. It was as if he was perpetually wrestling against some invisible bonds. Please, Doctor, he said, through gritted teeth, even speech seeming to require exhausting effort. I think there's something in my brain, and your hypnosis is the key. Say you'll help me. I may not look it now, but I'm a man of means. I can pay you. Just say you'll agree to treat me. I felt such sympathy for the poor chap, who seemed so wretchedly unhappy. And while I had little doubt as to what would prove to be the eventual diagnosis, I was as eager as he to open that damaged mind of his and peer inside. The remainder of that first session was filled with further questioning. What else was happening in his life when the problem first started? Was he suffering lasting trauma from some unpleasant event? Was there a history of mental illness in his family? Was there something from his childhood? But to all my questions, Geach was either infuriatingly vague, sometimes to the point of seeming purposefully evasive, or spoke with such observable difficulty that he was hard to understand. In my field of work, however, it is not uncommon to experience resistance when trying to get to the root of a patient's psychological distress. The human mind is adept at developing barriers and defences with which to protect itself. It is for precisely this reason that I have found hypnosis such a powerful tool, and was, despite some misgivings, keen to use it in my next meeting with Geach. I saw him again the following week, in my consulting room, with the lights dimmed, and Geach recumbent on the couch. I proceeded to lull the man into a trance-like state. It may surprise you to learn that I achieved this partly through quiet suggestion, and partly through the cliché swinging of the pocket watch on the gold chain. The pocket watch, in this case, is theatre, unnecessary to achieve the end goal. But I find my patients are so accustomed to the popular notion of hypnosis, drawn from its depiction in books and films, that they're often sceptical when a watch is not produced. From the hypnotist's point of view, it could just as easily be a string of sausages. The trick, of course, is to get the subject to focus. For Geach, with his constant tics and spasms, this was not easy, but gradually, quite quickly actually, he started to settle, his eyelids drooping, the tension falling away, until he was restful. Not asleep, for the hypnotized subject is not truly slumbering, but deeply relaxed. I was about to commence my interrogations of Geach's subconscious mind when he surprised me by speaking first. "Oh, thank God," he said, and I immediately noticed the higher pitch of his voice. "Mr. Geach," I said softly, "you are in a safe place. You are in a peaceful place. Stay focused. Stay calm." "It's very difficult to stay calm," he said, "being cooped up in such beastly surroundings with no one half decent to talk to. I say, you keep a very nice room. The wallpaper is lovely, and the plants. It has a feminine touch. Are you married?" "No," I replied, without thinking. I recovered myself. "To whom am I speaking?" "Madeleine Beckett," he answered. "And you are?" "Dr. Felix Latimer," I said, again without thought. "Delighted to meet you," he said. "Very interesting," I ruminated. "This must be a case of split personality after all, and this is some alter ego that Geach has cultivated." And then I noticed his arm outstretched towards me, limp at the wrist, as if he was offering his hand for a kiss. There followed an uncomfortable passage of seconds that undoubtedly felt longer than it lasted. Despite myself, and purely in the interest of continuing my interrogation, I kissed the hand being proffered, and the arm returned to Geach's side as he spoke. "You have a lovely moustache," he said. "Some men's moustaches are too bristly, but yours is very soft." "Thank you," I said. "Miss Beckett, could I ask—" "Mrs.," he interrupted. "I was married once, to a man who didn't love me, and in fact tried to kill me." Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Beckett." There did not seem much else one could say in response. "Please, Madeleine," he said. "He not only tried, but did kill me, actually, for I was hopelessly adrift for very many years, and then finally I ended up here." "In London?" "In this thing. What does he call himself? Geach." He articulated his name with such comically pronounced distaste that I found it impossible not to chuckle. A strong indication of self-loathing, perhaps. Evidence of disassociation from the self, I reflected. "Have I said something amusing?" he said. Slight vexation sounded in the voice. "Oh, no, I said. "Just the way you said the name." "I don't mind if you laugh," he said, the softness returning. "You have a nice laugh. Geach never laughs. He's a crashing bore, but you already know that. My husband never laughed either. He hated it that I liked jokes and had my own opinions. He thought women should know their place. Some men have no joy in their hearts, and no love either. And you don't strike me that way, Dr. Latimer." "Please, Felix," I said. "You seem to be a very kind man, Felix." "How so?" I asked. "I can just tell," he replied. "When one has been around as long as I, one gets to understand human nature ever so well." "Oh, and how long is it that you've been around?" I asked. "It was 1850 when my husband smothered me in our marital bed," he answered. Good Lord, I thought, 104 years ago. This character of a murdered 19th century woman struck me as a rather odd alter ego for Geach to have struck upon. But examples of similar cases are not exactly uncommon in the annals of psychiatry. "Good Lord," I said. "Yes, and I, a young and loving wife," he continued, "struck down in the prime of my life. If only Charles could have understood what a passionate, devoted, loyal woman I am, we should have had a lifetime of bliss. But alas, he was not The voice dropped to a whisper. He was not a real man. Aha, I thought. Now we're getting to something. Perhaps old Geach is suffering from some kind of sexual anxiety. In what way? I asked. I trust you will not think my bold speech untoward, he replied, but you have such a gentle manner that you seem to invite confidence. And trust me, the spirit plane I inhabit does a great deal to help one shed the modesties and tired formalities of the physical world. You see, as a woman, I have always yearned to give myself completely to someone, Felix, to yield mind, body and soul to a strong but tender lover. Charles could not love me, and it was because of his inadequacy and his rage that eventually Geach paused, a look of absolute desolation on his face, and at the exact same moment I glanced down at my lap and saw that he held my hand with much tenderness. How did you end up here? I said presently, clearing my throat. In Geach. He hesitated, then shrugged. I was a wandering spirit, drifting in the ether, as you would have it, longing for the corporeal form, I suppose. Not that I would have selected this form had I been given the choice. Once I was considered beautiful, Felix. I wish you could see me as I really am. I said nothing. Instead, I sat for a minute, gazing at Geach's sad but reposeful face. For a fleeting moment, it was as if I descried another face, another body, overlaying his, and when I looked closely it was possible to perceive, as if through a thin film, a woman's face, perfectly drawn and, as Madeleine had said, quite beautiful. His appointment was drawing to its close. I had another patient to see. When I had brought him out of his trance, he was keen to learn what I had uncovered through the hypnosis, but I was non-committal, saying only, "It was certainly very interesting, Mr. Geach, but it will be necessary to repeat the process several times before I can get to the bottom of things." And a week later, he visited me for his third appointment. Geach arrived, and if I was not mistaken, he was able to walk and talk much more freely than before. The nervy, edgy quality about him persisted, of course, but it required considerably less effort to get him onto the couch, and hypnotizing him proved easy. "Felix," he said, again talking in Madeleine's light tones and offering his hand. "What a lovely surprise." I took the hand in mine and kissed it. Geach shivered and giggled, rather coquettishly, I fancied. "Softer than ever," he remarked. Inexplicably, I felt embarrassed. "Only an oil recommended to me by a fellow at the club." "And you've trimmed it, too." "I've just shaped it a bit, you know." "I think a man should take good care of his appearance," he said. "Geach doesn't. Charles was very handsome, of course." And Geach, as Madeleine, talked. Or rather, we talked about everything from what books we had enjoyed. She adored Austen, of course, but we found common ground with Dickens. She had died before the final instalments of David Copperfield were published, and I was able to tell her the ending. And what music? Her tastes were surprisingly modern and ran to jazz, whereas I am a classical man, but we bonded over Gershwin to more intimate revelations about our childhoods and formative years, and occasionally touching upon our personal beliefs and ideas about the world. I am ashamed to say that I was enjoying talking with Madeleine so much that I had rather begun to forget about Geach. He was just lying there, so to speak, and when I looked at his drab, impassive form, with its grey face and cracked lips articulating Madeleine's charming and often invigorating speech, I am sorry to admit that I found him increasingly repellent. At our next session, once he was under, I immediately draped a white sheet over him. It was a shame, I contemplated, that Madeleine was merely a personality of Geach's. This hidden 130-year-old woman possessed so much more vitality and wit and warmth than the exterior man. It now occurred to me that perhaps Madeleine was Geach, the former happy-go-lucky man about town, somehow suppressed and it was my mission to find out what had happened to Geach that caused him to withdraw so deeply into himself, and to have created Madeleine. But as always, Madeleine asserted herself as an entity altogether more real than Geach. "They are so fleeting, our appointments," she said from beneath the sheet. "Even the word is so cold and clinical. Why must we meet under such constrained circumstances?" "He's paying me by the hour," I replied. "I don't want to bankrupt the poor fellow." "You know perfectly well what I mean," she said. "But what if there was some way I could extricate myself, and then we could meet whenever we wanted?" "But you are trapped. You have said as much yourself." "It is sad," she said. The arm, and by extension the hand, emerged from under the white shroud. "I want to see if your moustache is still soft," she said, and as I brought her shapely fingers to my lips, I saw that her nails were painted. Geach's case had by this time begun to occupy my thoughts between our appointments. I would find myself thinking of Geach or Madeleine at odd times of the day and night, turning over little things she had said in my mind, and wondering what they indicated about Geach's condition. Late into the evening, in the quiet study of my townhouse, I wondered whether he could be hypnotized out of this alter ego, as it were, or whether it would take many months of psychoanalysis to get to the roots of this split personality, or indeed if he would need to be treated with drugs. I was scared that perhaps there was no cure for Geach. I confess also I was scared there was, for to cure Geach would surely mean to kill Madeleine. I had lived alone for much of my life. I was devoted to my work, my practice, and my research. It was not the case of never having met the right woman. Truthfully, I can say it just never occurred to me that I should marry. But something in my psyche had shifted the moment I met Madeleine. And now, in the solitude of the dusk-filled room, silence itself was deafening. I must have cut a pathetic figure that evening in May, wet through from the rain, clutching a bunch of flowers that had looked a sorry affair even before the downpour, but were all the flower seller, setting down his stall for the evening, had left to sell. Geach certainly seemed to think so, for he actually chuckled when he opened the front door to see me in his porch. It was the first time I had seen him so much as crack a smile. "Dr. Latimer," he said, "you're the last person I expected." "Please, call me Felix," I said. "Can I come in?" He ushered me inside, understandably baffled, when I handed him the sagging flowers, and stood dripping onto his parquet floor. "Have you got a living room, or something with a couch in it?" I asked. He led me through to a very nicely appointed lounge. Geach had seemed so down at heel when I first cast eyes on him that I had imagined some ghastly, depressing little hovel for him. But he had said he was well off, and that was quite evidently the case, for he would neither have been able to afford my fees or keep such a desirable address. It did not escape my notice that his nervous habits were less pronounced than ever, and he moved with none of the faltering hesitancy of old. "Can I get you anything?" he asked. "Whiskey and soda?" I suggested. "And do you have a bedsheet I could borrow?" Once the unavoidable awkwardness was out of the way, I soon had Geach under, and was back with Madeleine. She had such an attractive and appealing voice that it seemed a shame to muffle it with a sheet. So, using Geach's kitchen scissors, I had cut a hole for the mouth to speak through. I had lately come to notice that Geach had rather fetching green eyes, and that it was possible to look into them without diminishing the overall effect. So I made little eyelets too. The irony that I had inadvertently conjured up a ghost was not lost on me, but it was easier this way than having to see Geach every time I spoke with Madeleine. "I couldn't wait until our next appointment," I said. "I got so desperately lonely. I just had to see you." "Oh, Felix, I miss you terribly when you're not near," said Madeleine. "And I too, my darling," I murmured. There, in Geach's lounge, we poured out our hearts to one another. We spoke of our hopes, our fears, our longings, our most intimate cravings, and always circled back to the tremendous obstacles that fate had placed in the way of our being together, the barriers to our love. We spoke like this for hours, I caressing her hand, she stroking my cheek. Eventually she sighed. "Kiss me. Before you leave me again, kiss me." I seized that slender wrist and kissed her delicate hand, crushing my lips against the porcelain skin, grazing the fine knuckles with my teeth. "No," she breathed. "Kiss me." Afterwards, I reclined on Geach's sofa, cradling a tumbler of whiskey, while he sat on the arm, listening to me talk. I had told him, sparing him what I felt were the unnecessary details, what I now believed to be the case, that there was a supernatural explanation for his affliction, and he was not, as I had initially supposed, troubled by a brain disorder, but rather possessed somehow by the spirit of a long-dead woman from the 1800s. I went on to tell him that this, being a psychiatrist, was somewhat outside my field of expertise. "So you see, Mr. Geach, I'm not sure there's a lot more I can do to help you," I said. "I mean, where does one go from here? A priest, perhaps?" Geach sat nodding, ruminating. "I'm most awfully sorry, Mr. Geach," I said. "I'm not entirely sure why, but I've become rather personally involved with your case, and I can't help feeling like I've failed you." "Please, call me Reggie," he said softly. "Reggie, then," I said, and sipped my whiskey. "Now then, Felix, tell me more about these feelings of failure." I was dimly cognizant of him stroking my hair. The very next day, he called me out of the blue. "I need to see you this evening," he panted down the telephone. "How does 7 o'clock sound? Your place?" "Yes, certainly," I replied. "But why?" "Tell you when I get there," he said mysteriously. "What's your address?" For the second time in as many days, I was acutely aware of the ridiculous spectacle I was making of myself. I answered the door to Geach wearing my best tuxedo and clutching the champagne flute I had been polishing just before the bell went. I was alarmed to see that Geach had brought a young woman with him, perfectly charming creature under any other circumstances, and was demanding I let the pair of them in. I was, I admit, unreasonably vexed to see her there, and when they bustled past, I found myself following them, open-mouthed, into the living room. "What's going on? Who's she?" I asked, remembering and hastily swiping the white bedsheet from the settee and gathering it up into a ball. "Mavis Creswell, this is Dr. Latimer," said Geach. "Dr. Latimer, Mavis Creswell." "Hello, Dr. Latimer," said Mavis Creswell, extending a hand. "But what is she—" Before I could finish this utterance, Geach stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he was embracing me. Instead, with one arm around my neck, he pressed something against my mouth and nose, a handkerchief, and consciousness slipped from me. Up until the night before, I had still considered myself a man of science, a rationalist, a man with the clear-eyed pragmatism to follow the path of scientific discovery to whatever uncomfortable truths it may lay bare. But that evening at Geach's, when I had finally succumbed to Madeleine's breathless urging, I knew that there are more things in heaven and earth indeed. A glowing aura around her shone even through the shroud of white linen. From her emanated vaporous tendrils that encircled me, drew me closer, slipping beneath my shirt collar and under my cuffs. And that was when I knew for certain that Madeleine was no mere trick of Geach's mind, but what, exactly? Ghost was too much of a stretch for my rationalist brain. Calling her an entity was somehow more palatable. But whatever she was, when I was laying on top of Geach's body, allowing those fog-like vines to coil around me, I was certain of something else, that happiness for me was locked in Geach's brain, or rather in that perfect woman, anchored to it. When I came to, I was alone again, or rather Geach and the girl, Mavis, were nowhere to be seen, for I was palpably not alone. I was aware almost instantly of a second presence in the room, and not just in the room, but within me. I was aware, too, who it was. "Oh, my love," I said aloud. breaking the silence. But her reply was a whisper inside my mind that only I could hear. I had evidently fallen when Geach had drugged me. I now lay on my rug, and turning my head to one side, I could see a faint tint of red in the pile. I must have cut myself when I went down. My head throbbed, and I grunted with pain. Madeleine shushed me. "We're together now," she said, only to me. There, on the sheepskin rug, before the fire still smouldering in the hearth, we gave ourselves to one another. The next few days were blissful. I cancelled appointments, cleared my diary. My life, which had been so empty, I wanted to fill with Madeleine. We dined in the best cafes and restaurants. "Table for one, sir," would be the greeting. "If you say so," I would smile back knowingly. We went to plays and shows and the cinema, walks in parks and down on the Thames. Sometimes Madeleine would complain of boredom, and we would leave before the second course arrived or during intermissions. She was as headstrong as a 130-year-old woman has a right to be, and I loved her for it, for she was my Madeleine. And at night, I would feel those cool tendrils coiling around me, outside and in. And a week later, I bumped into Geach. I had taken Madeleine to a concert I thought she would like, Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, but she insisted we leave early. That was how I found myself on the underground platform, waiting for the next train back to South Kensington, only to find Geach. We caught each other's eye, and he made to dash off, but I quickly grabbed his arm. "Wait," I said. "I'm glad to see you." He eyed me suspiciously. "Knocking me out was a bit unsportsmanlike," I went on, "but whatever you and the girl did, it must have worked." "You look terrific," I said. Geach released himself from my grip and gave me a look that I did not like one bit. It was almost a sneer. "You look dreadful," he said. Instinctively, I raised a hand to my face, and running my fingers over it, I felt a new sharpness to my cheekbones, and new lines. "Do you know," he continued, "I almost felt sorry for you at first. Thought I couldn't go through with it. But of course, after I introduced you, I stopped having much of a choice in the matter. But I must say, you didn't exactly cover yourself in honour, kissing my hand like that, clambering all over me in my own house on my own sofa. Don't worry, we both saw the face you'd drawn on that sheet when we came round to your gaff. Dirty old man." "What are you talking about?" I spluttered. "Mavis is into spiritualism, seances and the like," said Geach. "It was at one of her seances that the damn thing got hold of me. It must have been floating about in the rafters, just waiting to be summoned. Once she latched onto me, there was no question of her letting go. The only way to get shot of her was to find another host. You, my friend. As soon as I read your piece on hypnosis, I hit upon the idea. You get to know someone, something, when they're living inside you and off you. And I knew you'd be the type she'd go for. All I had to do was introduce the pair of you, let her get her hooks in, then have Mavis do her bit. We're engaged to be married now." You mean," I began. "Yes, it was all a ploy. Get you to put me under, set you rummaging about in my head, let her spin you a lot of rubbish to make you fall in love with her. It was easier than I thought it would be, I must say. He must have been bloody desperate." I was affronted, partly at his outrageous confession, partly at the insults to my beloved Madeleine. He saw the expression on my face and laughed cynically. "Oh, I get it," he said. "You're all lovey-dovey right now. This is the honeymoon period, you mark my words. Sweet nothings is how it starts. Pretty soon you won't be able to put one foot in front of the other. I suppose you think she's a ghost or whatever. Well, I don't know what she is, but I'm not sure she was ever a woman. All I know is she's a filthy parasite that squats in your brain and gnaws away at you, eats you from the inside out." Other travellers were gathering around us on the platform, ready to continue their own journeys. My mind was so much reeling from all that Geach had said that I barely noticed the faint rumble of the approaching train. "You know, it's funny," he smirked. "Funny what comes across in someone's writing that they don't intend to come across. Even from your article on hypnosis, I could tell you're a conceited, arrogant prig. I was conscious of everything that went on while you thought I was in a trance. I saw how you sat there with the kitchen scissors, thinking about doing me in. Or maybe you should have. I, for one, hope you'll be very happy with that bitch." I know now that I was not completely in control of myself, but at that moment I thought it was my own anger that seized my hand. I slapped him roughly across the cheek, slapped him with such force that it knocked him sideways, to the gasps of the onlooking crowd. But I swear to God that it was not the slap that sent him plunging onto the tracks. It was the green vines of Madeleine that unfurled from within me like octopus arms and swept him over the platform's edge. He was scrambling to his feet when the train shot out from the tunnel and obliterated him. What else could I do but run? To everyone on that platform, it was I who had pushed Geach in front of that train, and the only alternative explanation I have to offer is one no sane person could possibly countenance. I fled to this doss house, to the grim quarters I have occupied this past fortnight. It's in my favour that I look nothing like photographs of me. In my favour, too, that the rapacious old harridan who calls herself landlady to this miserable tenement is half blind. I know that there is no escape for me like there was or could have been for Geach. He was, I now realise, more psychologically resilient than I, the stronger man, even if wickeder. Perhaps I will die soon and put an end to it. Every day I deteriorate further. I do not recognise the face and body in the cracked mirror above the sink as my own. In truth, I do not recognise it as a living man. I lost another tooth this morning. I wonder if she will let me die, or whether she will keep me just barely alive. My one hope is to finish this account of everything that happened, so at least the truth will be recorded and preserved, if not believed. Even in this, however, I am thwarted. Madeleine lets me write, and then forces me to tear up the pages, or burn them in the sink. She likes to toy with me, like a cat tortures the mouse for sport. I have tried to write my story 100 times or more. She says she is bored with me, but on some nights her creeping vines still slither between the bones of my ribcage. On those nights, I remember our courtship and weep. Oh, I know full well it was all lies, but there was one true thing she told me. I wish you could see me as I really am. She has shown me many times. Today's story was A Meeting of Minds by Jasper L'Estrange. It was read by Jasper L'Estrange. If you enjoy the show, why not become a patron on Patreon and gain access to exclusive content? It's the surest way to help me keep creating. You can also buy me a coffee, like, subscribe, comment, share, follow on social media, and read the description for more information about the show and how you can engage with it. Until next time, sweet dreams.